Please today, it's my job to introduce the Haddocks, Maureen and Gordon, who are sitting here in front of me. Wave, Haddocks. They're very good friends of the Edwards School of Business. They're both graduates of the U of S. Gordon from this very faculty a century or two ago, was that? Yeah. Were you here when it was an old airline hangar or something? Was that? Yeah, okay. And Maureen is a graduate of the College of Education. And they're true entrepreneurs. I don't have this in front of me, but I know for sure that they were involved in bringing Lululemon. They were involved in the Body Shop. They were involved in Roots and all of the brands that you young people know something about bending down and yoga pants. I don't know what. But we've been working with them for many years. And you will find out why they're such excellent people to work with. Every year I have the pleasure of going out with them and our Haddock speaker, and we have a riotously good time. So I know that on a Monday where the Haddocks are coming to introduce their speaker, it's going to be a great day. I just want to say one note before Gordon introduces Harold Warner, that when I decided that I was going to move to Saskatchewan and become Dean of the Edwards School of Business, I had the good fortune of Harold was talking in my class, and afterwards he said the very first thing that somebody had said to me about Saskatchewan when I realized that I was moving here, and that was, and I don't know that you'll remember this, but you said to me, I have never had a bad debt in the province of Saskatchewan. And that was the very first thing that was said to me. So it's interesting how years later our paths cross again. And now I'd like to actually have Gordon come and officially introduce you.
Thanks, Dean. Whoops. Sorry, the Dean is challenged in that area. There we go. Now I can talk. Height-wise, Dean, that's what I meant. Hey, yes. Before I start talking, I just want to thank the Dean for providing this opportunity, and I'd like to thank Jan, who always hides at the back, and her team, who actually does all the work putting this all together, and we get to be in the spotlight and up front, but that's the worker bees, and we're the drones. So thank you, Jan, once again. I have to have my visual aids as well. Why be normal? What's the fun in doing that? A few weeks ago, I spoke at an NSBA event about the entrepreneurial lessons I had learned over the past 4 decades. Now, as I was limited to a 15-minute speech, I had only enough time to talk about 10 of them, 10 things I wanted to bring out to the folks gathered. But, you know, when you have 40 years of making mistakes, the list is a lot longer than 10. And one of the things I did not get to talk about was Serendipity Conversations. And I think one of the biggest mistakes people make, and especially young people, is they tune the world out. They plug their ears with iPhones and other devices and miss some of the greatest opportunities to meet people and perhaps change their lives. I see it happening in the malls, and I see it at the gym, and I see it always on an airplane. And who knows who is sitting beside you sweating away on the treadmill or sitting beside you on a long plane ride. Believe me, do yourself a favor. Unplug and start talking. You wouldn't believe the lost opportunities that happen every minute of every day. Well, this long preamble brings us to our guest speaker, Mr. Harold Warner. And guess why he's here? Thus starteth the lesson. Our talented dean met him on an airplane and said to me in an email, I was the one who brought him to the University of Calgary to talk, based on an unbelievable 5-hour plane ride with him. We sat together and he showed me his PowerPoints and I asked him questions for hours. Thus endeth the lesson. Now, Mr. Warner was born in Saskatchewan and unfortunately left our province at the age of 10 with his family and moved to Calgary. Now, this used to be a very familiar theme in this province, but that's another speech for another day. Now, I have a few theories about Saskatchewan people. One theory states that unlike mountain people, Saskatchewan people make the best sailors. We even have a sailing club. That always fries the people who live on oceans when we say we have our own yacht club. Saskatchewan people think the ocean is no different than the prairies, a flat line with sky above, while the mountain people slowly go insane because there's miles and miles of nothing. Mountain people love to have their view blocked by a wall of granite. So what does Harold, a prairie boy at heart, do when his view is blocked by a wall of stone? He becomes passionate about getting up higher than the mountains in order to see what is on the other side. He becomes an international competitive ballooning champion and once held, get this, 9 world records in ballooning, including the world record for distance flown in a single hot air balloon flight. This was the record he held from 1984 to 1989, and it was broken by this guy, you might have heard of him, Sir Richard Branson of Virgin fame. And I'm thinking this Branson fellow probably threw about $2 million at this project to kick your, higher than that, much higher, 10 million, to take the record away from him. Now, ballooning is not an inexpensive hobby. So how do you pay for it? Like so many other entrepreneurs, Harold turns his passion into a business. He assembled the world's largest fleet of custom air balloons, owning everything from a flying cow to a shopping cart. And later in 1994 began the development of his pneumatic shelters based on his knowledge that came from the development of his hot air balloons. In the year 2000, he sold off his ballooning business to concentrate exclusively on the development of inflated shelters and started Dynamic Shelters. And Dynamic has built everything from hospitality shelters for promotional sponsors, I can think probably beer companies would come to mind, to portable temporary hospitals, and has even developed an inflatable blast-resistant shelter which has gained acceptance for use in refinery and chemical plants throughout North America. And you know, when I was thinking about writing this speech, I wish I could have been at your house the day you told your parents that you were going to make a living flying balloons. So, ladies and gentlemen, a man who has watched his favorite movie, Up, 58 times, Mr. Harold Warner.
Thanks, Gordon. Thank you very much. I take it, somebody's going to press a button up here. Before I go, I do want to tell you, as Gordon mentioned, I was born in Saskatchewan. And as a young man, as a young boy, really, I left Saskatchewan. I went to Calgary, went to this wonderful, great big city, which was very exciting. I left a little town that there we go. Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm not strong in technology, by the way. And I got into this big, exciting city, and I left a town that you could hit a 3-wood across and thought I was so lucky. And it took years to understand really where I had come from and what it meant to me to be from Saskatchewan. As Gordon said, and it's a fact, or as Daphne said, it is a fact. I have never written off. This is the nearest province to me in my business life. I have been a career entrepreneur. I have never written off 5 cents of bad debt in the province of Saskatchewan. There is a city in Canada I won't fly to without a lawyer. But in Saskatchewan, this is a rock solid culture. The one that I echo the most, and I like the most that expresses about living in Saskatchewan, was said by Alan Fotheringham. He was the writer. He was the guy that wrote the back page of the Maclean magazine. People used to say he read the Macleans from backwards to front. And he said when he moved from Saskatchewan to British Columbia, in one move, he systematically elevated the average IQ of 2 provinces. Before I start anything about our company, I always recite our 3 core values, and I do that whether it's with a staff meeting or with people like this. The first one is safety, and I do want you to understand that everybody has an advocacy for safety with their own staff, but as you will see, we have no reason to exist without other companies' advocacy for safety. And so safety is not simply the way we conduct our work in our factory, it is the reason why we are in business. Accuracy is of critical importance to us because in our business, our structures, they expand, they move. If we're not accurate, then structures that are used one day at Resolute Bay and the next day on their way to a response in the equator at an earthquake, we're in big trouble. And innovation, I think I'm going to demonstrate in this time with you that we are an innovative company and we practice being innovative. We are ISO 9001-2008. Now, this is the very first air shelter I ever built. And the reason why I built it is because I got a complaint from my former business, which was this. And the customer said to us, they said, you know, the balloon is wonderful, but if it rains, you can't fly. If it's too windy, you can't fly. If it's too hot, you can't fly. If it's too cold, you can't fly. Like, it's great, but you got to get a balloon that works in the sun and the wind and the rain and the cold. Well, you know, I wasn't going to be able to find the pilots to fly that, so we developed the air shelter. And in the time that I was in ballooning, I was extremely passionate about it. Now, I want to say this to you. You're all in education. Once you're finished your education and you want to find something to do where there is absolutely no redeeming value, no purpose for anybody but yourself, pick ballooning. It's if there's really, you know, there's not much you can control. There's really not a lot of substance to it. I've said if you want to suspend yourself in a wicker gondola above the earth and watch it roll underneath you, that's it. And that's what I did for about 26 years, as good in it as anyone in the world. So the first thing you need to know is even if your business has little purpose, but you do it well, you can actually meet some really good people, and we did. Now, we were also the creators of some of the most interesting balloons that you'll ever see, and this was one of them. And I just for the business grads, I want you to understand this. That cow was an awful lot. We actually had 3 of them, and each cow had a lifetime earnings of more than $1 million. We sold the advertising on them. We flew them in different countries. We flew them for companies like Cadbury's and dairy companies and at air shows. And I felt really, really powerful, very significant, because I was the guy who had brought Mother Goose's fantasy to life. I mean, what purpose I had, what significance I had. Hey, diddle, diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. Until I flew over a village in Quebec, and a little boy came up to me and asked me in French why I had a banana under my cow. The other story that I'd like to tell, I'll show you, this is another one of our special shaped balloons, and we flew this one for the first time at the 1988 Winter Olympics before, and it was such an influence over the landscape in Calgary with the Olympics that even after the day of even on the second day of the Winter Olympics, it made the front page of the Calgary newspaper, and I thought that was a big deal. Now, I had a lot of stories, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on ballooning because we're here to talk about something else, but I do want to tell you one, because I said it had no purpose, but there was one day when I fulfilled a mission. And a friend of mine had come from Grand Prairie, Alberta, to me in Calgary and was spending the day with me and spending a couple of weeks with me because he wanted to learn how to fly and how to operate a balloon. And he was staying at our house, and I was going to teach him how to fly. And we got up the first morning, we got up and looked out the window, and it was completely fogged in. We could not see across the street. And he was dejected and disappointed and thinking that was it. We were gone. I said, oh, no, let me check. So I phoned the weather office, and for sure, all of southern Alberta was covered in a great blanket of fog. The fog stretched well beyond Calgary for miles south. The weather office said it's going to be like this for at least till 10 o'clock. So I went, great. So we threw the balloon in the back of the truck, drove about 30 miles south of Calgary, inflated the balloon in a ditch, launched up through this cloud, through this fog, and about 500 feet up. It was absolutely magnificent. Below us was this huge blanket of white, as perfect as you imagined in your fantasies or visions of heaven. Off to the west, we could see the Rocky Mountains just barely peeking out. To the north, there was one building that stuck above the fog, the Calgary Tower back then, and it was the tallest one at the time. And as we were drifting, we were only about 500 feet above the ground. The fog wasn't that deep, but as we were drifting, we could hear tractors starting as farmers started the equipment. We could hear trucks going down the road. We could hear wheels on the pavement. And then we heard someone crying, and we heard a little girl crying through this fog. And we were drifting right towards her. And as we got closer, her voice became more and more clear, and we could see her, hear she was crying, and she was saying, "Randy, stop it." And Randy you'd hear some scuffling, and you'd hear some more crying, there's tears, and you'd hear, "Randy, I'm going to tell Mom." And you'd hear more scuffling, more rocks flying, and we drifted right over top of him. And through that great heavy fog, on a cool morning, a voice called down to Randy and said, "Randy, be kind to your sister." So we straightened that kid out. So this was our first air shelter. We were in the promotional shelter business, and we put an identification on it. That got us going, and that was fun. We also, the same as the balloons, were able to build iconic shelters like this. This is where people in Kingston, Ontario paid for their bus tickets to ride on Greyhound. Portable hospitals. We won the contract for Texas, for the Texas Health Resources, for the portable hospitals because of our speed and our security and weather. This structure here was a 50-bed hospital with bio-isolation. That means that the air going out of it was caught into filters, so if somebody had something really nasty like Ebola or SARS, the bacteria was caught and killed. And that whole structure, 50 beds, oxygen on, installed air conditioning on, 5 people, 1 hour and 20 minutes. It was up and ready for people. So that was really, really fast. And I think we still probably have the fastest hospitals in the world. And then we responded. This hospital here was used in Bangladesh after a cyclone, and that structure was set up 20 minutes after the helicopter turned off its rotors. And so really, really fast response. That's a big part of it, but also very, very portable, because that structure would have maybe 20 beds inside it, and we could carry that inside a helicopter and get it to a remote section. This was a structure. This is an indoor hospital isolation room, and when we use the word dynamic, as I say, it's not an accidental choice of words for our name. This structure transforms itself. So down in the right-hand corner, you see that yellow box, and that box is drawing air out of the indoor hospital isolation room. Right here, you see a vent. Air goes in here. There's another vent that you can see there. It passes across the person inside and gets drawn out there. Now, what we're doing is we're releasing this inner liner, because if things go really bad, if it is really something really nasty, then we shrink wrap the casualty. We completely vacuum pack them. Now that sounds, but when you realize that 50% of the people who died of SARS were health workers, this is a big deal. This is an important piece of innovation, because you're separating the health worker from the risk. This is one of the largest air dome structures in the world, a big super construction dome in Fort McMurray, but even innovative to the point that if that big door, so I'm going to go back here, that big door there is 20 meters tall. If the door is blocked, we just let some air out of the column, slide it aside with some cables, drive in, drive out, and you can see the canisters there. Those are our shipping boxes. And so that structure is portable, even though it's 105 feet tall, sorry, young people, 30 meters tall, and extremely large. This was a fun development that we did, and I just want to give you a sense of what inflatables can do, because it's not just about, innovation is having your eyes open to ideas and your mind open to ideas, but there's 2 bladders there. You see the top bladder there. That is a very flat, high-pressure bladder. It's pressurized to about 15 psi. The lower bladder here, these are very low pressure, about 1/4 psi. And what we do is we lay that structure down on top of a landmine, and then myself and another friend can haul another person out, and we have no effect. Even with our weight on top of that, we have no effect on the mine trigger. We will not trigger a landmine. And so that was a way of using inflatables for a practical purpose. Now, the thing that really drove our business ahead a lot was a very bad event. 9/11 actually drove it a lot, but this one here was larger. There was an accident at a refinery of BP Texas City. There was an explosion. There was 15 people killed and 177 injured. And when they did the forensics, they found out that 100% of the fatalities and most of the injuries occurred not because of the explosion, but because the buildings they were in failed and collapsed. And so as a result of that, common temporary facilities were banned from inside a refinery. But then you get this massive collapse in productivity, because a guy who is working here has to go here for coffee break and back, here for lunch and back. And some of these distances were like over a kilometer, where people had to walk it, and they get to the break, and they turn around and go back. So someone just asked us, they said, what would have happened to one of your structures in that kind of an explosion? And we did a very simplified computer analysis on a product called ANSYS software, and we said, you know what, we think we're going to deform. And I'd also had the experience of being in balloons when we were in just nasty, nasty weather, and we were in turbulence, and it rattled around, shook, it would deform, it would twist into a sausage and come back to normal. And that was the resilience that we had imagined when we made that. So we went into live field testing, and that is some kind of fun. And in fact, here is a video of one of our earlier tests. So this is offset. This is 4,400 pounds of nitromethane with 1.5 pounds of C4 in the middle. And you see the shock wave hitting the structure now, and the structure is doing almost exactly what our computer program told us it would do. So with that, we had something going ahead, and we were then building structures for the petrochemical business, putting structures in places where they could keep people safe in the event of an explosion and move people closer to their work site, right? So instead of walking a kilometer, maybe they only had to walk 300 yards. Now, this is a value statement. I know there's a bunch of MBAs in here, and this is where you really want. This is the page. There's nothing interesting here. There's nothing going to explode, but this is what you wanted to see. The value statement, they had 2,000 workers, and as a result of using our structures, they saved 1 hour of travel time per employee per day. They had an all-in burdened labor cost of $53 an hour, so they credited us with saving $106,000 per day, every day for 2 years, or $80 million productivity enhancement on a $3 million investment. So you can talk to people. You can walk into an oil company and say, I've got something that can make you safer. They'll say, we're pretty safe right now. You know? But if you say, I got something that will make you safer and save you millions of dollars, they sit down. We want to talk to you. So then we got up into bigger explosions because we had to see, what can we do? How far can we take this? Where can we get our value proposition to be most productive for us? And so this is into a monstrous kind of explosion. And then we go up into this one here, and this is what's called a vapor cloud explosion. And on the right here, you're going to see a container that is being filled right now with propane. And you're going to see it inflate, and when we're going to discharge it, we're going to have that blast hit the structure, but we're also going to hit it with some heat. Now here's this little piece of information for you. We're dealing with compressed air. So we've got a wall of air between the occupants and the outside. The temperature on the outside of that structure hit 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The amount of change inside our structure was 3 degrees. And that's only on the nearest wall size. So air is a very, very effective insulator. In addition to giving us enough rigidity to hold the structure up, but enough flexibility to be resilient, like a punching bag, the air is a big part of it. Now, as you can see here, down in this number here, we're at 2.7 seconds into the video, 1.7 seconds into the event, and at 4 seconds, that structure is completely normal. It goes back into its normal, just like your car tire would, faster, if you hit a rock when you're driving down the road. Okay, now, there's a couple of things I want to talk about that are very important in this. The parameters, the key parameters for damage and injury in a blast, there are 3. And they are recognized this way. One is peak, which is usually referenced in PSI. That was a 5 PSI blast. That was a 10 PSI blast. The other one is duration, and the product of peak and duration provides impulse. Impulse is the destructive component of a shock wave. But the other one that's very important here is rise time. Now, I want to tell you how important it is, how exciting it is to be somebody who is nobody and to participate in discovering something that is truly exciting. This is a camp at Kabul. And that's a fairly standard, typical military camp. And you'll see army shelters surrounded by what's called HESCO bastion. And HESCO is a container that we fill up with gravel, and then you can use that to protect yourself from small arms fire and the like, and to some degree, blast. Okay, this is a 3.1 PSI blast on that structure. And you can see it's not a good day. That mannequin is judged to have been killed by blunt force trauma, 3.1 PSI. The mannequin is judged to have been killed by blunt force trauma, but had there been occupants in there, the velocity of, I want you to understand the shock wave is really moving at the speed of sound. So when that debris flies, there's potential for other accidents. Now here's another important thing that happened. That blue line is the incident wave. That's what happened outside. So if I would have been a soldier walking outside the shelter, I would have experienced the wave that you see in the blue one and the blue line. On the inside of the shelter, the shock wave got inside. It actualized, reformed, actualized, reformed, actualized. Let me explain it this way. If there was an explosion in the center of this room, the shock wave would radiate out, hit the walls, come back, get us again, hit the walls, come back. That's complex reflective wave. And this graph is showing you how significant and how nasty it is because that shock wave reforms in the shelter 8 times, twice higher than the incident wave, the one outside. This is our shelter in exactly the same pressure wave, 3.1 psi. And so it's not like we're 10% better. Because those mannequins don't, well, the mannequin down there, he does lose his hat. It's a baseball cap. But he's not supported, as you'll see. The walls aren't even touching his back anymore, so he does fall down because there's nothing left to support. He was leaning against the wall. So the difference between 3.1 psi in a conventional structure and 3.1 psi in ours is very, very significant. But here's the stuff that just sent us right over the moon. This time the colors are reversed. But on the red, you see the incident wave. On the blue is the transmitted wave. So we had an incident of 3.1 psi, exact same thing. And what materialized? Half of that, 45% reduction. But the rise time, this is a shock wave. The rise time is how long did it take to get from there to here. It's usually measured in a nanosecond or a microsecond. This is 4.5 millisecond rise time extension. Now that's a 1,000-fold increase. I want you to think about where this really matters. First of all, let's talk about what 1,000-fold means to you. If all of you are very, very healthy people, I know that, but if you're all laying on the floor, one of you is laying on the floor, and if I could physically hold 1,000 pounds at shoulder height, and I dropped it on you, I could kill you. But if I held that and I increased my whole time response by 1,000 and set it down on you and picked it back up again, you wouldn't even have a bruise. I mean, there might be a protest while it was on you. I get that. But the rise time extension of, now take yourself to Walter Reed Hospital, which is filled with young men and women whose brains have been damaged by improvised explosive devices, and ask yourself what would have happened if we could have extended the time that that shock wave acted on their brains by 1,000. And the difference is meaningful. And here's where I start to have a lot to get excited about, because the bigger the explosion is, the more our structure does to attenuate and mitigate the rise time. It drops, the bigger the structure the explosion is, the more it reduces the peak, the more it reduces the impulse, and it continues to create this rise time extension. Now, I've got to tell you about another part of our innovation. So people said, okay, this is really cool. This is great, your structures will take it, but when there's an explosion, there's stuff flying everywhere. There's debris flying. So what are you going to do about that? There's going to be bars of steel come flying through your walls, and it's going to get people. And we said, no, we don't think so. But we can resist that. And so we created this. This is think of it as corrugated, really, only it's made out of vinyl. And it uses it, sorry, this is just about dead. Up at the top there, you see 4mm dazzle board. Right? You've probably never heard of dazzle board. Dynamic Air Shelters Limited board. See, and it's just our old recycled vinyl compressed to become thick, somewhat like plywood. And so we take our recycled properties and create this corrugated item, and then we fill it with sand. And when we fill it with sand, it has stopped a rocket-propelled grenade. It will stop 50 caliber automatic rifle fire. But that's not the world. I mean, we've done some military work, but if it'll stop that, there's nothing that nasty on a refinery. So it will stop stuff that will go through 2.5 centimeters of plate steel. And so now you see a structure fully set up, resistant to blast, secure in the event of debris, and we have used air, we've used the product that we built, and air and sand. And that's how that structure works. Now, where does this all take place? Well, our office, as I said at the beginning, I live in Calgary, and I moved to Calgary. I've been in Calgary for a long, long time. But in 2003, Calgary's unemployment rate was ridiculous. It was 2%. And so when you're hiring people, you're hiring the reluctant. And so you have this concept. And I had this business going. We started in 1994, and I was going to hire people, and we were going to hire more people, but I was competing with companies like Shell. I couldn't. And so I went to Newfoundland on a project, and I encountered a community, and I was asked to build this project there and it worked, and I hired some local people for a while, just a short-term project, but I was in a place called Grand Bank, which is down at the Iberian Peninsula, so I'm not in St. John's. I'm 3 hours from Grand Bank, and I'm in a small community. And a friend of mine, I recruited a young engineer from England who used to work for a friend of mine who had a balloon business in England. And that friend of mine had spent a lot of time in Newfoundland. And when that engineer told him, he says, I'm thinking of going to Newfoundland to work for Harold. He said, make sure you set your watch back about 50 years. He said, because it's a little slow there. And that's Newfoundland, the sleepy little village that we have. And I'm going to tell you more about it, but here's some of the things that induced us to go there. First of all, infrastructure. I just bought 2 acres of land from the town for $1. Buildings that we took over, like that one right there, we just took it over. It was empty. And the government said, you can use this for jobs, it's yours. That's our hot air welding shop. This is our large shop. This one here is 17,000 square feet, and we have offices in it. And that building in Calgary would cost at least 15 times more than what we paid for it. So first of all, I get to put the money into our product and our business instead of infrastructure. And then we have good trained people using fairly sophisticated advanced production equipment, and we've trained them. We have very, very large pieces that have to be moved around in the factory, and we have a body of manpower to help us with that. And we have all kinds of modern production equipment that they have had to learn and develop their skill with. Now, trouble is when we're in 3 different buildings, the only way we can have a staff meeting is grab the hockey arena. But that's okay, because in the summer, the hockey arena is ours, because we use it for the testing and the quality control of our building. So it's kind of putting a few of our structures, we're putting a few parts together here, but it works. But I want to tell you about Grand Bank. First of all, it has a population of 2,600 people. Right next to it is the town of Fortune, 5 kilometers to the south, and we're sort of in between the two of them. And it has a population of 1,700 residents. That is their unemployment statistic today. It was 48.5% when I stepped into that town. Because when we stepped into that town 10 years ago, it was right at the collapse of the fishing industries. Now, these people are not sitting here waiting for somebody to come and offer them a job. I mean, some of them are migrating out, working in Fort McMurray and places like that. But while they're there, they're going to the local community college and taking apprenticeship courses. They're taking welding courses, anything they can to develop a trade. And the majority of the unemployed people in the community have taken technical training. Our staff turnover rate is less than 10%. Now, I was told that Suncors, which is one of the largest corporations in Canada, in Fort McMurray, paying God knows what, is 40%. And last year, ours was 4%. I need you to understand this. Our product is not we're not a push-button factory. We have to be how we seam that stuff, we're talking about airtight stuff. So we have to develop skill. And so the problem I had in Calgary is I could hire them, and about the time they knew what they were doing, they were going down the road to somebody else. And so I had to get people and keep them. And that part of our equation has worked. In a company, this is the difference between being in a really competitive environment. So don't think, my God, he's the employer of the... Actually, we just won Employer of the Year in Newfoundland, but forget that. In a company-sponsored questionnaire, 100% of our staff said they liked their job and they were working where their skills were best used. I saw that in a book. That's why the question went into one of our questionnaires inside the staff, part of a staff questionnaire. Is that somebody said, if you can get a 20% positive response to that question, you got a good thing going. But in Newfoundland, in a smaller community, where people didn't have alternatives, we got 100% turnout. 100% of the respondents indicated they wish to remain with our company on the long term. And of course, they participate and enjoy innovation. 65% of our staff are female. So let's talk about why that's important. It's not, it works that way because we have people who are sewing and working vinyl welding equipment and the like. But our vice president, my vice president of operations is a female. The operations manager is a female. The head of quality control is a female. Now, some of their husbands have gone off to places like Fort McMurray because Newfoundland suffers, particularly rural Newfoundland, suffers a significant outmigration. And so women who may have children to look after choose to and want to stay home. And so we have good jobs for those people. We also have CAD technicians and like. And of course, the important thing about is that if you actually look at that population of the province, there are more women in those two communities than there are men. We have people who are trained for modeling or 3D modeling and the like, so AutoCAD designers from that community. And we have training programs combined with high staff retention to solve this problem that we had in 2003. So the government is taking people off the roll. I will admit this. The government supports us. They say, if you're going to teach that person how to do something other than fish, for the first 6 months, we got 75% of that. So first of all, for you young entrepreneurs, and it says in your book, you got to have this much working capital. You got to be prepared for this kind of expenses. Your professors are going to hate me for this, but I'm going to say bullshit. There are so many good programs around that you can launch your business with, that you can maintain it. There are places that need, and still in this country, there are people that need, and many places that need the jobs. And of course, what we're looking for is to find people who find interest in their skill, develop it, and want to stay with it. I want to tell you a couple things about our business. First of all, what do you do about the high-level guys? I mean, how many engineers want to move to Grand Bank, Newfoundland? The answer is none. So I have an engineer that lives in Halifax. I have another one that lives in Toronto. And because of a business that we've taken over, we have 3 in Fredericksburg, Virginia. But that's okay, because now with the electronic movement of files, we don't have to have the engineers. They make trips there, back and forth, as they oversee their projects, but our engineers aren't resident. We have sales offices. We wouldn't think of trying to sell anything. Well, we do sell a little bit in Newfoundland, but not very much. But our sales offices are in Calgary, Greenville, South Carolina, Houston, and now we have a person in Europe. And all of that is influenced because, okay, the world is changing. We are becoming global, even though we're in this really small, remote community. Our second largest sale in 2013 was to Azerbaijan. I believe the highest sale in the whole history of our company is going to happen in 2014 in Kazakhstan. And so what we've kept there is the technical, the fabricating, the factory portion of our work. Now, there's new regulations coming out sponsored by the American Petroleum Institute. The American Petroleum Institute were the people who said, you got to get those buildings that failed out of the refinery. And so now they've done some new assessments, and they said, you can have steel buildings, you can have explosion-proof buildings, and you can have these guys' buildings. But nobody else in the world has qualified as soft structures. So we have, let's say for a while, until somebody comes after us, we've got a strong position in that market because we are about 1/2 or 1/4 of the cost. Now, but because of the Berry Amendment, I want to tell you what everybody knows what free trade is. It's this idea that our two countries are equal and we're going to trade back and forth. But there's one little item, that's a little checkbox. It's called the Berry Amendment, and that is an amendment to the free trade agreement that says if the U.S. military is buying anything, they have to make absolute certain that that product is made in the United States unless there is no other way of getting it. So in other words, for us to manufacture in the United States and to have a relationship with the U.S. military, we have to have manufacturing in the United States. Let's talk about my issues and obstacles because it's not all easy street. First of all, we pay inbound and outbound freight penalties. Obviously, it takes more time, but again, I'm going to go back to what I was dealing with. In the city, I had a harder time getting people to work extra hours to catch up on a project if we were behind. Within rural Newfoundland, with our local population, if we get behind, I can get people to step up and improve that. My travel, oh my God. I can get to Tokyo faster from Calgary than I can to Grand Bank. That's a fact, because I got to fly to St. John's through Toronto, then I got to get in a car and drive. And then just the supply chain. I mean, I don't have a single supplier in our community. I don't have a single supplier within a couple of 100 miles of us. So it takes more planning, more logistics, but the payoff is still there. I'm still going to say that if I had to do it all over again, I would do it all over again. So what do we do to keep this going? Well, first of all, we have to advance staff training, because we have to, as our company has grown, has become more complicated, more sophisticated, we've had people in lean training, we have people in psychology training, people to become managers, people to become leaders who may not have had that within their education. We have to improve our manufacturing capacity. Some of that is by stepping outside of Grand Bank a little bit, but some of it is by just responding to the opportunities that we have right there. We have to invest and improve in manufacturing processes and concentrate on the development of skill. I mean, skill, manufacturing looks so simple, right? You just have to take something from here, move it on a conveyor belt there. But you don't know how many ways you can mess that up. And so the development of skill is an important part of our whole equation. We have to manage our issues, whatever they happen to be. They're not free. And we have to maintain our people's commitment to us. And in a smaller community, you know, one of the things what percentage of our staff in Newfoundland have kids playing hockey? Well, probably most of them. So guess who sponsored the Zamboni? They had a broken down Zamboni. That was ours. We have to innovate. And we do that in a variety of ways. This is a Skidoo trailer with a 160,000-gallon tank on it. Now, you're probably familiar with the frac industry. It gets a lot of news these days. But to carry a steel 160,000-gallon frac tank is 2 semi-trailer trucks. 8 guys all day to install it. We need 1 guy, 1 piece of equipment. We lay it out, we spread it out, we put the water inside it, turn the taps on, use a leaf blower, a Canadian Tire leaf blower, to fill the top collar so that it's buoyant and the water stands it up by itself. This is the company, Avon Rubber is the company that builds the inflatable portion of the U.S. military hovercraft, so we formed a joint venture with them. We developed the product and we formed a joint venture with them so that we could sell to the Americans. This is a product, when it comes to covering up a construction site, does something very, very effectively that other buildings can't do. You'll see a skid plate being laid out here. The structures are being, am I creating that echo? Sorry. Structures laid out. You see there's no cranes here to put up our structures. We lay them out. We have to cover this module, and watch how we cover this up. And when the crane needs to bring more supplies to the module, we open it and we close it, just like the Sky Dome. It takes a little bit of time, but the productivity enhanced by putting work like that inside in a wet or cold region like Fort McMurray, when something is half built, oh my God, winter's coming, we had no idea. It happens. That structure took 1 hurricane and was put together and opens and closes with forklifts. We could probably do it if we had more time to set the thing up. We could do it with winches. Now this is a building that we had to postpone, but we're building it now. And this is our iconic factory. And in Newfoundland, you've probably heard there's a few icebergs, right? So we're creating a structure. Our factory is inflatable. We bought the land behind our factory, and we're creating an iconic structure for 2 reasons. The reason we want our own structure, obviously, to work in. But the reason why we want something iconic is because that's the way we give back to the town. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the Bilbao effect. The Bilbao effect, the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, they have found that there are more people come there to see the building than come there to see the contents of the building. And so we want to have something that just dresses the town up a little bit. And we said, let's do that. And it is assembly of very easy parts that come together, but that structure is going to take some massive weather. There's things that you should know about our building before I about our business before I wrap up here, and I want to try and stay on time. First of all, our R&D budget is effectively 0. What I just showed you, you go, okay, how do you do that? It's actually not 0. It's a negative factor because when we do an R&D project, we expect funding to about 115%. How do we do that? First of all, in an impoverished district, we get 45% SR&ED credits. The rest of the world gets less, 35 and 25. The other thing is that organizations like ACOA, Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, the provincial government of research and development corporations, the National Research Council, because we've done good R&D work, participate with us. And ACOA will say, we're going to back you, but only for 75%. We go, they said, you're going to have to put in the rest yourself. So then we go over to NRC, and they said, we'll give you 35%, but no more than that. So I'm okay with that. And so we were able, and they know that, they know what we're doing, but those programs are there. They're there for entrepreneurs because research and development and innovation is absolutely the core to new manufacturing jobs. Without it, it's gone. It will be 17 years before I say pay the same taxes as you do. Why? Because when I set up my factory there, and they said, how many jobs you're going to create? And I told them, and when I turned out to be true, I got a holiday. Industrial land is free. As I said, I bought about 2 acres for $1. A used building is dirt cheap. And I want you to understand something. People say, oh, that's it. He's on the government dole. I got news for you. We pay more money to the government than they pay to us. That's a fact. So it works. Never mind the fact that we took those people off unemployment. Never mind that there are people who can't fish anymore that are now building inflatable shelters. The reality is, for all this assistance that we get from research and development and the development of our business, more is going back. I swear that's true. And it's been fun, because if I said I'm going to create 100 jobs in Calgary, I don't know that I would have met Mayor Nemshi. But in Newfoundland, I've had the premiers visit us because we're a model. Are you kidding? A guy from Calgary came here? Everybody's going there. And that was fun. So what do we do now to make this happen? We invest. And we invest in people's management training, job skill training, incentives and rewards, wages. We don't pay low wages. Somebody says, well, so what are you paying them? Minimum wage? I know somebody who has an inflatable structure manufacturing company in Virginia, West Virginia, South Boston, West Virginia. And they said their highest paid production employee is getting $16 an hour. We would only have starting wages below that rate. We are not there to be cheap. We're there to keep them for a long, long time, because it's far cheaper to keep them than it is to train new ones. And we invest in people creating value within our community. We participate in the community. We sponsor things as much as we can. And we're also trying to build a template for other towns, because we get some pride in what we've done. We actually get a lot of satisfaction out of the fact that we have done something completely out of the box and made it work. The province knows that. The financiers know it. When I talk about the National Research Council, they know about us in Ottawa. We've been on the inside cover of their annual report. Not because we're that special, but because we've been outside the box where we were visible. And we worked very hard at doing things well. So that's my story. I do want to tell you, because I had to skip over one thing, because I tried to load this video and I couldn't. I wanted to show a couple of people this, but you've seen our structures and you see the columns and you saw how we fill them with air and up they stand. So somebody asked, in fact it was on a plane this morning flying here, somebody said, would that work on the moon? And it's true. If you look at NASA's website, you'll actually see that they imagine technology like ours. If we're going to go set up structures on another planet, we'll take them in a bag, set them up. We have an atmosphere, put a greater atmosphere inside the columns. We've got a building. But we did something different. We put water in the columns. We filled the columns up with water. Why? Because the structure was at the bottom of the ocean. And we sent down the bag, turned on the pumps, set up the structure, used air canisters to fire the anchors into the... And our mission is to create that huge dome, that prophylactic, so that an oil well can be drilled through our dome. And if there is a blowout, it will be captured by the dome, the oil sent up a riser, and caught. Now, it's really simple technology. A professor at the University of Engineering, of Engineering in Edmonton, Harold said, Harold, there's no way it can't work. I know better than that. I've messed up a few things that were simple. But it is innovation in an area that I wouldn't have encountered except had I been born in here, the sailing center of Canada. I just heard. I didn't know that. In Newfoundland. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention. Enjoyed it.